Michelle, thank you for being with us. So I'm Helen. I look after our people, the people team at Kadence, people partnerships, and some of our customer relationships. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Michelle Hartley. My organisation is called People Sorted, and I do a variety of things in and around the people space. So I coach HR women to connect back to their authentic selves. I deliver training programs for HR people called Find Your Awesome, and I run an HR community called the HR Geek Squad. And then I also do kind of bespoke training. So my secret mission is to slay death by PowerPoint training. So that's where I live.
And I should say that Michelle and I met on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
I kept coming across Michelle and her content, and just loved how authentic she seemed to be and how you built your brand, and was just really keen to figure out if there were things that Michelle could help us with at Kadence, but
Mm,
also our customers as well, because we're in this interesting HR and hybrid place.
yeah.
And a lot of our customers are trying to figure out through their HR teams, how do they support their people with hybrid working? So in case people haven't heard it, what's your tagline? Your
Oh,
beige to
I tran
brilliant.
yes, I transform HR teams from beige to brilliant using my magical energy.
Your magical energy and your amazing earrings. And I just
Yes.
I was like, I'm gonna need some color for this one. Get these babies on. And that is so traditionally different, I want to say, from how people think about um, human resources as a function.
Yeah. It's been really interesting to see how many other people in HR feel the same. And I genuinely felt, in my corporate life, I genuinely felt like I was an alien. I genuinely felt that there was nobody else doing what I was doing. There's nobody else who, was hiding all of their rainbows and joy under a navy suit. Like, and so when I kind of released myself, honestly, it is unbelievable. Like, there are people constantly coming up to me saying, thank goodness for you. I'm so glad. I now wear much more color at work because of you. I feel like I can be me now. And I think I spent a long time kind of burying that to then bring it back out to the rest of the world. So it's good.
Topical, I suppose, because one of the big things that I know you talk about and work with is culture and belonging and how people feel that they can bring themselves to work.
COVID, as much as I hate to keep saying it, but COVID was a massive change for us all, wasn't it? In so
Yeah.
many different ways.
Yeah.
But I think what I found most fascinating about it was people who are then trying to translate their cultures through to something that lands remotely. And I think that's just been really fascinating to watch over the last couple of years. In the remote world, it's interesting to try and, tease out what the core of the culture is, because actually it's not just free pizzas on a Friday or finishing at 2:30 at the end of the week, or having core hours so you can come in at 10 if you want. It's something much more than that. It's almost like something much more visceral now somehow, where we're beaming into people's houses all the time, right? And so it suddenly feels much more personal. And I don't know if you felt like this, Helen, in lockdown, where I felt really like vulnerable around like my colleagues being in my house with me, albeit remotely. I felt really like, oh, this is my safe space, and now you're in my kitchen, and now I don't like it, and it feels a bit strange. Early doors, people were really apologetic about, pets, kids, life, and I remember myself doing it myself, where, the cats would stroll across a meeting, or they just, turn up on the table or whatever, because I was crouching on my kitchen table. And I remember just being mortified, I was just genuinely like horrified that my personal life had crossed into work. Whereas now I love it. Like, it's my most favorite thing when I'm running training and someone's cat walks across their keyboard. I'm like, right, stop the training. I need to see this cat. Tell me its name. Tell me all about it. I think the culture stuff happens in those micro moments now. And I do think that's different, because I do think, prior to COVID, it was big bang stuff. It was pizza on a Friday. It was an ice cream truck in the summer. It was an after work party. It was beer Fridays, or whatever you had in your locations. But now I think it's much more about micro acts of culture. So, sending like little postcards to people that say thanks for what you did last week.
I had a conversation recently with Steve Cockram, who is a coach and runs a coaching organization called Giant.
Mm,
And he was talking about communication and the importance of communication when you've got a distributed team. And we were talking about the offsite, and how for a lot of organizations, the offsite has just become this huge and often only annual event.
Yes.
Organizations are thinking, well, at least I'll get my whole team together at that moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
which feels to me almost like the exact opposite of the micro moment, the micro
Yeah.
um, opportunities. And you're just kind of waiting for everything to be okay at the offsite.
Yeah.
And Steve was actually talking about, how you get good communication and connection going throughout the
Yeah.
year, just at the offsite. But I love that the kind of drip feeding of just that connection through the micro moments.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
definitely. It's interesting you talked about the offsites and away days and stuff, actually. I end up doing a lot of those now.
yeah,
And they're obviously more popular than they were in terms of, pre-COVID, because they were just taken for granted, weren't they? Whereas now they're very much like, oh my goodness, we're all going to get to meet face to face in real life for the first time, and that ends up being quite exciting. So
yeah,
with clients that I've been working with, we've been kind of almost reframing them to either like team growth days or like collaboration days, because obviously they're not away days anymore because you're not away. You're not away from the office. You're together. So it's interesting now to think about them in a different way in terms of, collaboration days, together days, growth days, where it's suddenly just that little micro reframe means that, it's suddenly seen in a different light. And actually for me, the kind of like content and deliverables on those days has also changed, where it's much more about we need to build in time for networking, connection, having conversations. We need to make sure we've got time to have a common lunch together or get
yeah.
outside and touch grass, or those kinds of things. And it's really, really important, and I think it's an interesting spin now, that where we've come much more focused on collaboration, whereas before I think we probably took it for granted. Oh, let's just hop in a meeting room together and chat it out. It's suddenly become much more, intentional now, which I really like.
I'm interested in when it comes to different ways of working, what you see coming up a lot.
Disappointingly, I'm seeing a lot more of this kind of enforced return to office stuff, which is just so disappointing when we have managed very, very, very successfully to transition our organizations to be much more flexible. And I genuinely do think that, adaptability is going to be our skill for the future. You're killing the adaptability piece, I think. It's well, no, you can't be flexible and work in a different way. You can only work in this space at this desk between these times. And I just don't think that's real anymore. And I think organizations that do that will end up having to pare it back again. And it's almost then you get that transition fatigue in your teams, because it's a huge upheaval to move people back to the office. And then it's going to be a huge upheaval to then flex people back out to home, because it won't work. And you'll get, talent loss, you'll get disengagement, you'll get people already that I've been talking to have had this enforced return to office, and it must be X days a week. But they'll go into the office on their X days a week, and there will literally be nobody else there. So what is the point? They could be more productive and do more hours if they're doing it at home. And so I just think we need to do better. And this isn't me being naive consultant, by the way. Like, I understand that certain organizations do need to have, a physical presence. I get that completely. Manufacturing, engineering, those kinds of places will always need humans in a space. And I get that. So this isn't about, doing one thing to exclude others, but it is about allowing flexibility where we can. I do see some aspects of good stuff happening. So I do see some really cool things, like organizations realizing that if they want people to come back to the office needs to be an attractive space. So that has been really interesting to see. So we're suddenly seeing a lot more things like supplying food for your employees if they come into the office. And that then therefore helps with the cost of living crisis, for example. So, come to work, have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner on us. That's fantastic, especially towards the end of the month where the bank account's getting a bit dry. Like that stuff, great, really great, because that's actually helping people and you're kind of enriching the lives of your employees. That's brilliant. And then I think there's this kind of mid space between the two where we've got some really good practices and also some really terrible practices. We've got some great practices in terms of, using tech and software to collaborate properly. So using some really great like Jamboard, whiteboard, brainstorming type tools, using kind of virtual connection type spaces, like love all of that. And then those that are kind of trying but without the tech, and then it just feels a bit more isolating for those on the receiving end of it. So yeah, I think there's still a mix.
What we're seeing in our customers is now people teams, HR teams often being the ones that are faced with this dilemma of senior leadership saying, I think everybody needs to come back into the office now, it's time. And they're kind of between a rock and a hard place because they have to do what they're asked to do. But the people they're supposed to represent aren't necessarily on board. Have you seen a bit of that, and any advice?
My question around stuff like that was always, okay, what problem is the return to office trying to solve? Because if they can't answer it, then there isn't a problem. Whereas if they can give me a clear answer, of course I'm going to support them and implement it and make it work, because then there's logic and there's rationale and it makes sense to me. If it's just because you want to look out of your office onto your fiefdom, then I'm sorry, that's not really how how we engage and develop our teams. So I'm always curious about things like that. So I always ask that kind of question. So what problem is the return to office trying to solve here? And then having those conversations with people, getting that feedback from teams is always really powerful. I remember doing something really similar back in employed life, and actually a lot of our people wanted to come back, and I was really surprised. But that's fine if that's the kind of general consensus, and that's also fine. But I think also what we forget is we've got a lot of stakeholders in our people who also get to have a say. And so I think that's got to be a part of it, because if you just force it, it won't land. And if you force it without rationale, it won't land. And all that will happen is you're just pushing your people to either definitely not work from home because they're resentful, or they'll leave and go somewhere that offers something much more flexible and palatable to, this work-life integration that we've got now.
Actually, a lot of what we're saying is community, connection, belonging. Like this is the
Yes.
stuff that matters in the future of organizations. So yes, it's been a hard, sped up process, and of course there's pain because of it.
Hmm.
Um, and nobody's going to get it right, because there is no right. Every organization is going to do it differently. But it
Exactly.
does feel like progress, even though it might be a steep learning curve.
Yes. Yes. And actually, progress is never linear either, is it? Progress, we think it's linear in our heads. We'd love it to be linear, that perfect graph from 0 to 100. We'd love it to be that. But the reality is, progress sometimes goes backwards. It sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. It sometimes, but overall, the trend, as you say, is much more positive. We are making changes. Some of them are sticking. With all the work that I do, the thread running through it is always connection and community. And I genuinely think that's going to be the way forward for organizations, for strategies, for culture, for business. It's going to be that, because if you can do it, you're going to put yourself above everybody else, because if you can make connections work in a remote working space using the right software and the right tech, oh my word, that's the goal, right?
Brilliant. Thank you.